What's up, Canyon Ridge? Welcome to week 2 of our series, Good News. This week, the problem has a solution. God has met us with His kindness and patience, but first, we have to sort of look around our lives and look at us to really see the problem that He came to solve. Let's jump in. We've been saying around here, everybody needs good news. And we just believe that. You need good news. I need good news. Hey, the good news that I'm clinging to right now is that fall is almost here. Anyone? Sweaters. I can't wait to wear long sleeve shirts and not sweat to death, right? Anybody with me? Okay. How about full confession, those of you that have started the pumpkin spice kick already? You've practically already decorated for Christmas at this point, you know? You're there. Well, hey, we started on this journey last week together called Good News, and last week we jumped into the first half of chapter 1 of this book called Romans. And basically the message of this book is this. Paul's gonna lay it out for us in the first half, and he's gonna say God promised us this good news. Jesus did what was necessary. The Spirit empowered it. The Spirit was with us, with the whole process along the way, and God has put His whole full weight on restoring creation. We put it simply like this. We said everybody is loved by God, and everybody is called to belong. Everybody. You and you and you are loved and called. This is for everyone. This good news, this message is all about God's action and our response, and every single person is invited to respond. And today, there is still such good news, but it's gonna come a little later today than you might want. Drew already kind of told you, let's buckle up. We're gonna journey on this together because today, there's good news. The problem has a solution. Now, this tagline, this can be shared. This is where we're going today. Maybe you have people in your life, they need to hear this. They've got a problem and they need the ultimate solution. This is where we're going to be today, but this is just it. There's a problem. Before we get to the solution, we have to address the problem. And I know bad news is uncomfortable, but it helps us appreciate the good news. People will often say, do you want the bad news or the good news first? And how do you respond? Lay it on me, right? Give me the bad news. I always choose the bad news first because I want to get it out of the way. We have to understand the problem before jumping to the solution. And now, today isn't necessarily about bad news, but today we have to talk about the problem. Last week we said, good news, there's good news. But if we really want to understand what that means for each and every one of us, we have to go to the problem first. Think about it like this. If you go to the doctor, they need to know what your problem is before they can give you a solution, right? I had an ear infection this week. I went to the doctor. I needed to tell her what was wrong with me before she just did something for me. If I walk in and she just starts wrapping my leg in a cast, that's actually not helpful, right? If you or your kid is failing a class, not that that would ever happen to anyone here, but say in theory, you or someone you know was failing a class. It's helpful to know why. Missing assignments, bad attendance, not understanding, before you just try harder. We have to understand the problem. But really, it goes a layer deeper than that. Because we're tempted sometimes to just cure symptoms rather than get to the root of what's really causing the symptom. If your car is making a loud noise and you just get soundproof windows and turn your music up really loud, it's not really fixing the problem. If you have headaches every single day and you go to the doctor, it's not helpful for the doctor to tell you, you should probably just take Tylenol every day for the rest of your life. You need to find the source. And here's the reality. We feel the symptoms. We feel the symptoms of this problem that Paul is going to walk us through. Now, he comes out swinging in Romans 1-3. And I can't read all of this for us today, but I encourage you to jump in this week, read Romans 1-3, discover alongside some people, but together today, we're going to pull out some key concepts. So it sort of goes like this in Romans 1. Paul's like, good news, boom, Romans 1:18. But God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshiped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. Now, if you were here last week, this is a little bit of a different vibe. Things are not as they should be, and Paul makes that clear from the beginning. There is a problem. There's a guy named N.T. Wright. He's an author and a theologian, and he uses this imagery about a tree in one of his books to kind of describe what's happening here. So picture this with me. He talks about this tree that he sees every day when he goes for his walk or he sits on this bench. He looks at this tree. This tree is like 200 years old. It's a huge tree. And he walks by one day and they're cutting the tree down. There's these guys climbing up on the ropes with chainsaws. They're cutting the tree down, and he's like, what are you doing? Why are you cutting down this tree? And they're like, it's rotting on the inside. Sure enough, they cut it down and they start taking the trunk and cutting it into sections. It's like 4 or 5 feet wide, and the entire trunk is filled with rot. Now, from a distance, it looked like a totally healthy, perfectly normal tree, but once you got on the inside, it was rotten. One of the guys cutting down the tree said, what you don't realize is that this tree was weeks or months away from falling over because the entire root system has rotted out. This was an accident waiting to happen. But no one could tell from the outside. Paul's explanation here in Romans for why this good news, this plan of God's justice and salvation is so urgently required is that the tree is rotten to the core. Could come crashing down at any minute, and the tree is humanity. The tree is human nature. We have worked ourselves into rebellion against our Creator, against God at every level. And so he summarizes it by saying this: so when humans go wrong, the world as a whole is put out of joint. When humans go wrong, the world as a whole is put out of joint. Now, this is big picture first. Paul's not speaking to individuals. He's saying all of humanity is out of joint. None of us are functioning as we should be. God had a plan for human beings, that we would know him, that we would love him, that we would follow him and serve him. And in doing those things, in his design, we might find the fullness of life, life as it was supposed to be in him, but instead, human beings thought they knew better. We often think we know better. If I'm honest with you, I often think I know better. So Paul says they traded the truth about God for a lie. Humanity has made some bad trades along the way. They traded the truth about God for worshiping things he had created instead of worshiping him. They traded the truth about God for a lesser version of their identity. God says, I've made you in my image. And instead, humanity along the way has tried to bear other images instead of him. They traded the truth about God for temporary earthly things. I mean, have you ever made a bad trade? I have thought I know better. And it doesn't take me long to realize that I've just made a bad trade when I choose my way over God's. I've traded the truth of God for thinking that I'm strong, I'm independent, I don't need anyone's help, I can do this all on my own. And you know where that lands me? Nowhere good. Maybe you can think of a bad trade. Because I think I know, but I really don't. Think about a rotting tree. Like, the further away you are from it, the better it looks. In fact, like we already said, you might not even be able to tell that something is wrong with it. And same with humanity. I mean, the further we are away from the people, the more peaceful it looks. Like, if you zoom out and look from really far away, it looks pretty good. It's easy to say, like, how bad can it be? So let's look at Earth. I think we're doing great. Look at how beautiful it is, right? Wow. Is it really that serious, what Paul's describing here? But the more you zoom in, the worse it looks. These verses, we're just starting to get a glimpse of the problem, but it's still a wide angle. Like, humanity is out of whack, but you and I, we're willing to acknowledge that because we experience the symptoms. How do we know that the world is out of whack? I have a question for you. Have you ever tried getting off of an airplane? You want to talk about humanity being out of whack? People go crazy. The dude in row 26 thinks he can beat the dude in row 3 off the plane, right? I just experienced that this week. I'm like, okay, go ahead. Go right ahead. How about parents or grandparents or nannies, those of you that have to go to school pickup and drop-off lines? You know humanity's out of whack at the school pickup and drop-off line, right? One of our staff members was telling me the first week of school, she went to drop her daughter off. She had been in line for like 90 minutes, right? At a certain point, she's like, just walk. I'll see you after school. Just get out, start walking, right? People are crazy. Walmart on Black Friday. Humanity is out of whack. But then there's more serious brokenness that points us to this truth. Like people getting sick and dying from an ongoing pandemic, or other medical health concerns, global crisis in Afghanistan and Haiti and beyond, people fighting through screens more than they're looking each other in the eyes. We've got relational struggles of all kinds, like a brother that hasn't spoken to you in years, a grandchild that just refuses to visit, a friend that totally betrayed your trust. The list goes on and on. All we have to do is turn on the news. The world is out of whack. All you have to do is scroll the feed. The world is out of whack. And we know this because we experience the symptoms. But Paul isn't done yet, because he's about to bring it way closer to home. He's like, no one is off the hook. You know, it's really easy to keep pointing the finger at everyone around us rather than at ourselves. I thought we'd do a fun activity together this morning. Why don't you just point to the person next to you and tell them how messed up they are, just really quick. Okay, actually don't do that. I don't want any fights breaking out, okay? But we're kind of good at that, right? It's actually way easier to go, you're really messed up. There's a debate that exists all throughout the book of Romans between these two groups of people, the Jews and the Gentiles. And Paul continuously points to these two groups of people because the Jewish people believe they had it all right and that all the issues that exist are because of the Gentiles, and the Gentiles would say the same thing about the Jews. And Paul's consistently like, no, 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 no. You guys love to point fingers. But you should look around and look at yourselves. How often are we willing to point our finger at the brokenness of people around us? To point out others' flaws and ignore our own? Or inspect other people with a fine-tooth comb and ignore how jacked up we ourselves are? Or even to zoom in on other people's issues and then also talk about them with others, never acknowledging our own issues. Paul's explanation of this problem invites us to realize that the problem is in everybody, not just everybody else. He's going to say that in Romans chapter 2. He says, you may think you can condemn such people, but you're just as bad. You have no excuse. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you are condemning yourself. For you who judge others do these very same things. And we know that God, in his justice, will punish anyone who does such things. Since you judge others for doing these things, why do you think you can avoid God's judgment when you do the same things? The problem is in each and every one of us, not just everyone around us. And so as Paul's building this argument, and we look and he's like, quit judging other people. You're going to be judged the same way. You're not off the hook. As I read that, the anxiety in me starts to build a little bit, and I'm like, oh, I definitely do that. I'm kind of terrible. And then Paul does this crazy thing, and he kind of turns this corner, and we don't expect it. It doesn't end the way we think it does, because then he goes in and he says, don't you see how wonderfully kind, tolerant, and patient God is with you? Does this mean nothing to you? Can't you see that this kindness is intended to turn you from your sin? Like, just as he's building a case against these people, like, you're going to be judged and you're terrible and don't do that, he's like, because God is so kind. God meets you with his kindness. Think about how patient and kind he's been. Even when we're quick to look at others, even when we're quick to point fingers or ignore our own issues, God just meets us with kindness and patience. That kindness and patience is intended to turn us from our sin, not drive us to look at everybody else's. Paul goes on to say, there will be trouble and calamity for everyone who keeps on doing what is evil, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile. But there will be glory and honor and peace from God for all who do good, for the Jew and the Gentile, for God does not show favoritism. This is for everyone. Oh, you, he says, Jew or Gentile that are quick to point fingers, the good news is for everyone. The solution is for everyone. Why? Because we all have the same problem. We all have the same problem. I love this in Romans 2:21. Paul says, well, then if you teach others, why don't you teach yourself? I think God just says, hey, Aaron, when you're quick to point fingers, you think you can teach others, you should start by teaching yourself. Because God doesn't show favoritism. We have to start with ourselves. The beginning of Paul's message in these chapters gave us sort of a wide-angle lens of the problem. Humanity is out of whack, and now he's calling us out when we dare pin that problem on everyone else but ourselves, because the problem is in everybody, not just everybody else. What we're often willing to see in others, we have a hard time or are unwilling to see in ourselves. The good news is for everybody, because everybody needs it. Even the person that you think has the picture-perfect life, even the person at work that you're like, oh, if I just had a fraction of what they had, or if my kids just obeyed the way their kids obeyed, or if I had the kind of faith they had. And Paul just says, nope. No one is exempt. No one. He says it like this in Romans 3, no one is truly wise. No one is seeking God. All have turned away. All have become useless. No one does good, not a single one. Man, aren't you glad you came to church today? Woo! He'll say it one more way. Romans 3:23, for everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. For everyone has sinned. But of course, we already know this. Like in your honest moments, you know this. You don't need anyone to tell you that you're messed up. This isn't an attack or an assault, just an acknowledgement of what's true. You know you're broken. You know you're broken. You know your issues. And we can try to muster up everything we think we need to save ourselves, or to better ourselves, or to strengthen ourselves. Everything. We can think, yeah, I'm messed up, but I'm strong. We can think, yeah, I'm messed up, but I can figure this out. I'm independent. Yeah, I'm messed up, but I'll just try harder. Some of us have even tried religion to save ourselves. We've tried knowing all the things, doing all the right things and not the wrong things, church attendance, serving, being a good person. None of those things are bad, but just like the car that's making noise and we try to fix it with soundproof windows and loud music, we haven't yet solved the problem. For everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. The movie A Knight's Tale says it perfectly like this. You have been weighed, you have been measured, and you have been found wanting. Every one of us found wanting. Now remember, we said things look pretty good from a distance. But that doesn't just apply to humanity as a whole. It's also true of our relationships with others. We keep people at arm's length. Like, if they only knew how messed up I am, that I have been found wanting, that I don't have it all figured out, that I'm actually way more broken than I show on my social media feed. I look more put together if I keep people far away. But also, we don't just keep others at arm's length. If we're honest, sometimes we keep ourselves at arm's length. We keep ourselves busy. We avoid silence because silence makes it hard to hide from ourselves. Not only are we good at looking at other people, but it keeps us from looking at ourselves. We're like the kid with the big paper due on Friday, and he's just pretending like it doesn't exist. Going out, hanging out with his friends, hiding from his reality. Many of us are like the tree that from the outside looks good, but it is just moments away from breaking. We hide from ourselves because we're afraid of what we might find if we look too long. Some of us have anxiety that has us on the brink of breaking. There's marriages on the brink of breaking, finances on the brink of breaking, but we hold ourselves and others at arm's distance because staring at our brokenness is scary. It's hard. It's not just that we're good at looking at other people, we really don't want to look at ourselves. And the power of the gospel, the reality of the good news is that we can actually take a long, honest look at our brokenness without fear because of his kindness and his patience and his grace. See, the good news of Jesus invites us, yes, to acknowledge that humanity is out of whack, but really it just invites us to take a long look at ourselves. To look our anger, our ego, our greed, our addiction. For some of us, our anxiety. To take a long, honest look at those things. To stop hiding from ourselves, to stop holding ourselves at arm's length, and instead take the bold, risky, costly step of acknowledging our brokenness and our desperate need for rescue. Man, when I stare my brokenness in the face, my instinct is to try to fix it on my own. But the solution to our problem is not in our own strength. It's not in trying harder. It's not even in religion. Paul will tell us in Romans 3:24, the solution to our problem, yet God, in his grace, freely makes us right in his sight. He did this through Christ Jesus when he freed us from the penalty for our sins, yet God. But wait, I've failed my family. I have failed my friends, yet God. But I've tried my very best and I have still screwed up, yet God. But I even told God I would do better and I didn't, yet God. The reality of the problem that we've talked about is that it's heavy and it's tough to face ourselves. And much of this facing of ourselves sounds like bad news. And if we're honest, it's like, oh, this is bad. And it feels like bad is kind of all I deserve. But everything that we have said today about the reality of our problem can be true, and there can still be good news. Because God has something different to say to the problem. God says the solution to our problem is relationship with him. Because of his Spirit in us, he is with us every moment, walking through every single thing with us, pursuing closeness and nearness with us constantly. The solution to our problem is being known and loved and set free. A gift we don't deserve, but we freely get to receive. So I told you we'd get here. Good news. The problem has a solution. And our solution is found in our admitting that our way is not the best way, but it's a choice to walk in Jesus' direction, a Jesus that would come so that we could freely be made right. But God's rescue deserves a response from us. I mean, first and foremost, it's probably best that we just take a deep breath together. Because when we understand the magnitude of the problem, when we stare our brokenness in the face, the miracle of the solution that God provided is just that much sweeter. Those of you in recovery, those of you that have participated in Celebrate Recovery, you know this. You're living this. When we remember the depth of our rescue, it makes the miracle of his solution so sweet. It's good to just pause and acknowledge that. But our next response ought to be overflowing gratitude, like, thank you, God. Thank you for doing something I could not have done on my own. But we ought to do something because of this rescue that we have freely received. We have the opportunity to point our gratitude in the direction of other people. We've seen today, God doesn't ignore brokenness, but he meets it with kindness and grace, patience. How do we show up as kindness and grace and patience in the lives of people around us? I mean, we all have people around us, therefore we all have broken people around us. We should pray and hope and dream for a chance to speak the good news about where our kindness and grace comes from. But then we should also really show up. Maybe you need to extend kindness and patience in the form of a phone call this week to that person that always has issues. Like if you call them, it's not going to be shorter than an hour-long conversation, but if you did, it would mean everything to them. Maybe you need to extend kindness and patience in the form of a meal shared together with someone this week, or going out and doing something fun with someone you know is struggling. We get to show up. Maybe you need to think of a specific name and spend time praying for a person. Make a plan to show up in their life this week as kindness and grace, not because you're so wonderful, but because you've been rescued. When God said, quit pointing the finger at everybody else, and we thought all we deserved was bad, he showed up as kindness toward us. When we realize what we've been rescued from, we should share that rescue with others immediately. I can tell you this. I've been pretty transparent here about my struggle with anxiety. And at the peak of my struggle with anxiety over a year ago, I had a friend go out of her way to show up for me. And I just have to be honest with you, I was not convenient at that time. I wasn't easy. I was really difficult and time-consuming, but she showed up. And she kept showing up. And she brought food, and she spent time with me, and she did fun things with me, and I don't know where I'd be without her showing up as kindness and patience in my life. We get to be these kinds of people. Maybe there's some of you in this room, you wouldn't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, but maybe you're one of the brave few that you have come and you have heard today, and you're like, yeah, I know I'm messed up, and maybe you're willing to stand in front of the mirror and name the brokenness. And in doing that, you might feel completely overwhelmed by just the depth of your brokenness. And I just want to say welcome. Welcome to being human. This is where Jesus meets us. We can call out to him and ask him to help. Or maybe you've been following Jesus for a while, but you've actually never really turned the mirror on yourself. You've never really spent time thinking about the problem. You just jumped straight to the solution. Maybe you need to have a conversation with someone you came with, or send a text to someone right now and be like, hey, I need to have an honest conversation with you. I don't want to hold you or myself at arm's length anymore. There is power in simply confessing our brokenness and not holding ourselves or others like this. Let's get real about the kind of rescue we need. We can run to Jesus. Let's run together in his direction. So we're going to take communion together here in just a moment. But before we do, the team's going to come up and we're going to spend just a moment singing together, responding in gratitude. But maybe you need to send a text, talk to someone you came with, pray for a specific person, make a plan to show up in the life of a specific person this week. Maybe you just need to say, thank you, God. I just overflow with gratitude as I remember and recall the kind of rescue that I've received. It is good to remember the rescue that we have received. Would our response be just overflowing gratitude in the direction of God as we remember that he has met us with such kindness and patience? If you're looking for more resources or a spot to connect, or maybe you just want to really jump in with us in good news, you can head to canyonridge.org for everything you might need. If you want to check out more, you can always subscribe, and make sure you share this with a friend. We'll see you soon.